Now, a race needs to have some rules, and one of the big draws, and it has something to do with the accessibility, and it also has something to do where this has come from and the kind of history, even as short as it is where do your rules come from? What structure do they take? And for us, people like the fact that we can print all of the rules on the back of this brevet card. Now, there are some difficulties with that, because people being people often think, well, if it's not printed on this, I can do it. That isn't what this is about. There are kind of two ways, as I see it, of doing this. One is to have all of the rules laid down up front in a huge book, whereby we think of every possibility, everything that can happen, and we give a consequence for breaking it. We tell you all up front about what's going to happen. There are a couple of things I don't really like about that. It's okay when you're in a controlled environment and you know that the factors aren't going to go into lots of nuance, lots of different circumstances, lots of different situations. You can go through that kind of rather robotic and formulaic process of going, well, you did this, it says this, that's the result. One of the things about unsupported racing that makes it good to watch, that makes it fascinating, is that there are so many different factors there. The rule book can't capture all of the circumstances in a race like Transcontinental, purely because of the reason that we open so many factors up. What we're doing is we're putting back in all of the variation, all of the adventure, all of the different sets of circumstances. That makes it exciting. It also makes it very difficult to really predict what everybody's going to do. So we're not on a tennis court, we're not on a football pitch, we're not in a very controlled sporting environment, and we've done that on purpose to throw all of these factors in that's going to complicate things. So those very rigid rule books work quite well when you've got a clearly defined playing field and set of indoor, or a chessboard or something like that. That chessboard is this many wide, and you can be confident that you've captured every rule that could possibly, permutation that could possibly happen, and you've got an eventuality there planned for it, and a circumstance as well. We can't do that on a race that goes across an entire continent, unless we go to the model which is like, have a really big rule book, and you're still not going to capture everything, but what you can do is, if something new arises, you make a judgment, you put it in the rule book, and then you've got a situation whereby you've got your rule book, it's all in a big book, and you've just got to police it. And it can get a little bit silly, because you end up with rules being applied to the letter of the law, and then you also open yourselves up to a culture within your event where the rules are policed to the letter of the law. They're not judged upon with a fairness and with a personality and a look, this is why I'm doing this, and in the kind of overall bigger picture. Each rule is ruled, you've done this, you've broken this rule, and it can be a very depersonalizing situation. So you end up with police, rules, rule breakers, and loopholes. And then because the racers don't think of the rules as being a person who's managing a fair situation, then they look for gaps in the rules and say, well, if the gap's there, and if it's not explicitly expressed in the rules that I can't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, because that rigid and kind of robotic rule structure I can try and work my way. So you get a lot of these activities then that people go, well, it's not strictly against the rules or so on. And I think that's a bad place to go. Now, in Transcontinental we do things a little bit differently, not least because we have that low entry fee and we have a limited amount of resources. And what resources we do, we need to put in the right places, and we need to look at things which are they actually achievable to do. There's a lot to be said for a certain amount of the rules being vague and the sense of the rule being conveyed. We have a kind of one that sums up, which I believe is one of the most important ones. Ride in the spirit of self-reliant and equal opportunity. And what that does is that sets out what the rules are trying to do, which is saying be fair to each other. And if people trust that we're being fair to people, then they can go into the race not with this set of rules, this big set of rules will go, oh, I know those and I know where they break down and I can take opportunity. They go into the race with a feeling of, right, I've got to be fair to the other people in this, because that's how the race director and about how the judgment and the interpretation of the rules is going to be levied at the end. So I use my best judgment on what's fair to everybody, and then if they think I've been fair, they'll be fair on me. So you have to use your judgment in fairness, and that is a huge amount of the spirit of the races. We want people to think about it and think about what's fair and not to look for gaps in the rule. That defines our community. That defines everybody who lines up on the start of the race together and they look at each other is, I'm going to be fair to you. And the person I finish ahead of is going to be happy that I finished ahead of them. And I'm going to be happy with the person who finished ahead of me and behind me, that we all did it together, and I can look them in the eye and go, you know, I didn't... Because that's, when you look at a blunt set and a cold set of printed rules and you try and work your way an advantage through the gaps in those, you're not looking at a human problem. You're not looking at your co-competitors on the start line and going, well, actually I want to screw you over by doing this. You want to be able to look them in the eye, shake their hand and go, you and me, we're going to do this in the right way, and whatever happens, you know, we can say we did that. And that, with the trust in the independent person who doesn't race, who can't race, who won't race because of this, they're saying, okay, I'm going to give that responsibility to arbitrate to somebody else, and it's going to come afterwards. And that, for me, is how we get 10 rules onto this card. It's having 10 rules, and it's having a person who makes sense of them and who people trust to be fair to other people. And that person needs to define what their sense of fairness is. They've got to create a sense of ethos and a sense of community around the race, so everybody kind of gets a feel for that's trustworthy. And they need to be fair to people. That's what I try to do, and I take that very seriously.